Hadrosaur is a group known as the duck-billed dinosaurs for the flat duckbill appearance of the bones in their snouts. They are descendants of the early Cretaceous iguanodontian and had a similar body layout. They were among the most dominant herbivores during the late Cretaceous in Asia and North America, and during the close of the Cretaceous several lineages dispersed into Europe, Africa and South America. Like other ornithischians, they had a predentary bone and a pubic bone which was positioned backwards in the pelvis. Unlike more primitive iguanodonts, the teeth of hadrosaurids are stacked into complex structures known as dental batteries, which acted as effective grinding surfaces. Hadrosauridae is divided into two principal subfamilies, the Lambeosaurines, which had hollow cranial crests or tubes, and the Saurolophines, which lacked hollow cranial crests. Hadrosaurids were facultative bipeds, with the young of some species walking mostly on two legs and the adults walking mostly on four. Aquilorhinus was an early hadrosaurid dinosaur known from the late Cretaceous of Texas, living about 80 million years ago. Around 5 meters long, it had a prominent humped nose that seems to have been an evolutionary prelude to the larger and much more elaborate crests found in later hadrosaurs. It also had an unusually wide and shovel-like beak, unlike any other known hadrosaur, which was probably a specialization for a different diet than its relatives. Since it lived along coastal marshlands, it may have used its broad jaws to scoop up large mouthfuls of soft vegetation, or, much like the shovel-tusker proboscideans that were once thought to have a similar lifestyle, it may actually have been doing something else entirely with that beak. As a hadrosauroid only known from two individuals, it seems unlikely that Zhanghenglong was a herding animal. Herding had lost its appeal in the Middle Cretaceous ornithopod group, before reappearing in the hadrosaurs of the later Cretaceous. Instead, it would have kept more to itself, foraging on plant material in its environment only in smaller family groups or on its own. Still, as a dinosaur, it probably took care of its young, though fossils of juveniles and babies are needed to better understand the behavior of Zhanghenglong on that front. Being found in a fossil bone bed where many eggshells have been recovered, it seems possible that we might know more about its breeding behavior before long. It probably would have been very territorial over nests and young, given the presence of small predators in the area, but it might not have been very skittish overall, as there were few large predators present. Acrostavis is known from multiple skeletons, including an almost complete skull, as well as other skeletal elements. It didn't have a crest, and its discovery was important in supporting the idea that the earliest hadrosaurids did not have crests, and that these were developed independently in Lambeosaurines. It was closely related to such animals as Maiasaura and Brachylophosaurus, and was a fairly early derived Saurolophine. It had a rather squarish skull, giving it a fairly distinct appearance, and it lived in a very wet floodplain area with many lakes and rivers, and seasonal rainfall. Barsboldia was a large hadrosaur, previously measured 10 meters in length and 5 tons in body mass. Its most distinctive features are found in the neural spines. These are very tall, particularly over the hips, and were described as second only to those of Hypacrosaurus, and the tips of those found in the first few vertebrae of the tail are club-shaped, possibly a sign of old age. As a hadrosaurid, Barsboldia would have been a bipedal quadrupedal herbivore, eating plants with a sophisticated skull that permitted a grinding motion analogous to chewing, and was furnished with hundreds of continually replaced teeth. If it was a Lambeosaurine, it would have had a hollow crest formed out of expanded skull bones containing the nasal passages, with a function relating to identification by sight and sound. It lived alongside many other herbivorous dinosaurs, so it would have had a lot of competition for food. Maiasaura lived in herds and raised its young in nesting colonies. The nests were closely packed together, similar to modern seabirds, with about 7 meters between them. The nests were made of earth and contained 30 to 40 eggs, arranged in a circular or spiral pattern. The eggs were oval-shaped, similar in size to ostrich eggs, and had high, prominent ridges on their black fossilized surfaces. Instead of sitting on the nest, parents used rotting vegetation to incubate the eggs. Fossil evidence suggests that baby Maiasaura could not walk upon hatching and that adults brought food to the nest. The hatchlings grew rapidly, from 40 to 150 centimeters in their first year, likely leaving the nest after 1 or 2 years. Their fast growth rate might indicate warm-bloodedness, and they had larger eyes and shorter snouts compared to adults. Research led by Holly Woodward and others revealed a detailed life history of Maiasaura, including a high mortality rate of 90% in the first year. If they survived, the mortality rate dropped to 12% in the second year, and they reached sexual maturity in the third year. Maiasaura matured skeletally at 8 years and switched from bipedal to quadrupedal as they aged. Their diet included rotting wood, and they lived in an environment with a long, dry season prone to drought. Brachylophosaurus is known for its distinctive, flat, paddle-like crest on top of its skull. Unlike the hollow crests of some other hadrosaurs, this solid crest may have been used for species recognition or display purposes. One of its most famous fossils is nicknamed Leonardo. This specimen is one of the best preserved dinosaur mummies ever discovered, showing detailed impressions of skin and even stomach contents, giving a glimpse into the diet and appearance of these ancient creatures. The discovery of soft tissue in a fossilized dinosaur is extremely rare and has provided invaluable insights into dinosaur biology. Analysis of the stomach contents of the mummy suggests a diet that included ferns, leaves and possibly other vegetation, giving scientists a clearer picture of its feeding habits. Fossils are part of the famous dueling dinosaurs specimen, where 2 dinosaurs were preserved together, seemingly locked in combat. Hadrosaurs are noted for having the most complex brains among ornithopods and ornithischian dinosaurs. Early studies, including those by Marsh and Ostrom, suggested that while hadrosaur brains were small, they were more developed than initially thought. In 1977, James Hobson introduced the idea of encephalization quotients to estimate dinosaur intelligence, finding that hadrosaurs had relatively high quotients, indicating advanced senses and behaviors. Modern CT scanning has allowed detailed studies of hadrosaur brains, revealing that their brain structure, especially the cerebral hemispheres, was more developed than in other ornithischians. Overall, these findings suggest that hadrosaurs had relatively high intelligence and complex behaviors among non-avian dinosaurs. Kerberosaurus is an interesting hadrosaur with some confusion surrounding its phylogenetic placement. It could be either a Saurolophine or an Edmontosaurin, and not much research has been done on the subject either way. It was found in the Tsigaian Formation, in Russia, living in the Maastrichtian age of the late Cretaceous. It was found alongside Amurasaurus, many turtles, crocodilians and theropods. It is known from some skull material, leading to the naming of the new genus. However, they did not attempt to reconstruct the animal, and if it was a Saurolophine, it would have fairly unlikely implications for biogeography. Shantungosaurus is largest known hadrosaurs, measuring up to 17 meters in length and potentially weighing over 15 tons. Its immense size rivals that of some medium-sized theropods and even some sauropods, making it the largest non-sauropod dinosaur known. The skull is particularly large, measuring up to 1.60 meters long. It had a wide, flat beak, ideal for cropping large amounts of vegetation. It had a complex dental battery consisting of hundreds of tightly packed teeth. It had relatively robust limbs, with forelimbs that were strong enough to support its weight. It probably walked only on all 4. The sheer size of Shantungosaurus has sparked scientific interest in understanding the factors that allowed some dinosaurs to achieve such gigantism. Its large body size might have helped it deter predators and cover large distances in search of food. There are two recognized species of Edmontosaurus, Anectons and Regulus. The first one was slightly smaller, while the other one was more robust with a small crest on its head. It was one of the larger hadrosaurs, with some individuals reaching lengths of up to 12 meters. Its size would have made it a formidable presence in its ecosystem. Like other hadrosaurs, it had a sophisticated dental battery, with hundreds of teeth that were continuously replaced. This adaptation allowed it to efficiently chew tough plant material, including conifers and cycads. Fossils have been found in large bone beds, indicating that it likely lived in herds. This social behavior would have provided protection against predators and facilitated migration to find food. There is evidence to suggest that it may have engaged in seasonal migrations, traveling long distances in search of food and more favorable climates. This behavior is inferred from the wide geographic distribution and the presence of Edmontosaurus fossils in different environmental contexts. While not the most intelligent of dinosaurs, it had a relatively well-developed brain among hadrosaurs, suggesting it had good sensory capabilities, likely aiding in navigation, foraging, and avoiding predators. Some paleontologists believe that it could produce a variety of sounds using its nasal passages. While it lacked the elaborate crests seen in other hadrosaurs that might have been used for sound resonance, it likely still communicated through vocalizations. The ability of Edmontosaurus to thrive in both cooler, northern latitudes and more temperate regions suggests it had adaptations for surviving in a range of climatic conditions, potentially including seasonal changes in food availability. Lambeosaurinae is an addition to the growing number of South American hadrosaurs, a radiation of this group that was previously considered unlikely but appears to have happened towards the very end of the Cretaceous period, thus showing that hadrosaurs reached almost every continent, except perhaps Australia. It was an average-sized hadrosaur, reaching about 9 meters long, and as a member of the critosaurs it probably had enlarged nasal passages for sound production and communication. It would have lived in social groups, like other hadrosaurs. In the Allen Formation, Lambeosaurinae lived in a coastal environment of fluvial plains, ephemeral lakes and estuaries with extreme semi-arid seasonality. Evaporites would accumulate in the arid seasons, only to be washed away as the wet season returned. As a hadrosaurid, Saurolophus would have been a large herbivore, eating plants with a sophisticated skull that permitted a grinding motion analogous to chewing. Plant material would have been cropped by its broad beak, and held in the jaws by a cheek-like structure. Feeding would have been from the ground up to around 4 meters above. It lived in coastal floodplains and dined on conifer trees, implying that it was more likely a browser rather than a grazer. Comparisons between the scleral rings of Saurolophus and modern birds and reptiles suggest that it may have been cathemeral, active throughout the day at short intervals. It had several potential methods for display in a social setting. The bony facial crest is an obvious candidate, and nasal diverticula may also have been present. These postulated diverticula would have taken the form of inflatable soft tissue sacs housed in the deep excavations flanking the crest and elongate holes for the nostrils. The spike-like crest of Saurolophus has been interpreted in various ways, potentially serving multiple functions. It may have provided muscle attachment points or supported a back frill. Dodson proposed it could be used for sexual identification, while Osmalska speculated it aided in thermoregulation. Hobson suggested the crest might have acted as a visual signal, possibly enhanced by inflatable skin flaps over the nostrils that also served as resonators. In 2015, Duell and colleagues described a partial nest containing several perinate juveniles from the dragon's tomb assemblage. These juveniles, with skulls less than 5% the size of adult skulls, were in the earliest developmental stage, showing that the distinct adult crest was underdeveloped in infancy. The study revealed that as the juveniles grew, their snouts lengthened, eye orbits became more oval-shaped, and other skull features evolved significantly. Paleopathology studies have found Saurolophus bones with bite marks likely made by scavenging Tarbosaurus, indicating selective feeding behavior. Bonapartosaurus is distinguished by a combination of unique features, including extremely long neural spines on the anterior caudal vertebrae and a slightly ventrally flexed preacetabular process. The proportions of various bones, such as the neural, sacral, and centrum spines, are notable, as is the expanded nemial crest on the tibia. The iliac lamina has a height-to-length ratio of 0.8 or higher, and the lateral profile of the supraacetabular process is asymmetric. In 2021, scans of the holotype revealed 3 paleopathologies: fractures on 2 caudal vertebrae and a malignant bone tumor in the left metatarsal 2. The fractures showed signs of post-traumatic infection, and the tumor was likely osteosarcoma. These conditions likely caused the dinosaur pain and limited its mobility but were not the direct cause of its death. The type specimen of Critosaurus is represented by a partial skull, lower jaws, and some postcranial remains, suggesting a large dinosaur about 9 meters long and weighing 4 tons. The skull, estimated to be 90 centimeters long, is missing much of the muzzle and upper beak, but still displays a unique tab-like crest formed by the nasal bones that folds back over itself. This crest helps distinguish Critosaurus from similar hadrosaurs like Gryposaurus. Notable features include a smooth-edged predentary, a sharp downward curve in the lower jaws near the beak, and a robust, somewhat rectangular maxilla. The frontal bone participates in the orbital margin, and paired processes of the nasals rest over the frontal bones. The nasal crest of Critosaurus, whatever its true form, may have been used for a variety of social functions, such as identification of sexes or species and social ranking. There may have been inflatable air sacs flanking it for both visual and auditory signaling. Caesornosaurus may have been small for a hadrosaurid. The type specimen pertains to an individual approximately 4 to 5 meters long, which was initially suggested to be a subadult, but has been suggested that it may have been more mature than previously thought. The geological layers of the Lago Caleuhuapi Formation, where Caesornosaurus is found, have had a complicated history of classification, initially being assigned to various formations before being recognized as part of the Chubut group dating to the Maastrichtian. The exact geological provenance of Caesornosaurus has been uncertain, complicating the understanding of its ecosystem. A 2016 study by Gabriel and colleagues explored the region's climate, revealing evidence of significant climate change over time. The formation showed signs of a floodplain environment with fluvial systems, but the lower layers indicated semi-arid conditions with gypsum deposits and desiccation cracks, reflecting a more arid climate compared to the humid Bajo Barrial Formation. However, palynological data from the upper layers, dating to the end of the Cretaceous and the Paleocene, indicate a return to a more balanced climate with wet and dry seasons. Caesornosaurus is from this uppermost part of the formation. Recent discoveries of hadrosaur remains in other parts of the formation might suggest a broader range for hadrosaur distribution within it, though these remains have yet to be thoroughly studied. Gryposaurus is a hadrosaur known for its distinctive nasal hump, likely used for display, species identification, or possibly combat among individuals. It measured about 8 meters long and featured detailed skin impressions, with varying scales on its body. For named species include Notabilis from Alberta, Latidens from Montana, Monumentensis from Utah, and Alsatiae, which is tentatively assigned to the genus and found in Texas. The genus has experienced taxonomic confusion, with specimens frequently reassigned to other genera like Hadrosaurus and Critosaurus. Although often considered the same genus as Critosaurus, they are currently separated. Gryposaurus was a common presence in the late Cretaceous of North America, thriving in diverse environments, particularly wetland peat swamps and highland areas. It served as a mid-level browser, feeding about 4 meters above the ground in generally wet and humid climates. Aralosaurus had a distinctive arch on its snout which leads scientists to believe that it was a Saurolophine hadrosaur. However, later research found that it was one of the most early derived Lambeosaurines, and that this nasal horn was one of the earlier Lambeosaurine crests. It is known from an incomplete skull, though it is estimated to have been approximately 8 meters long and 2.6 meters high at the hips. It had nearly 1,000 teeth, allowing for complex chewing as in other hadrosaurs. Its crest may have been used for ramming, such as in today's rams and goats, or just for visual display. It had a thick tail and bulky body, like other hadrosaurs, making it a very powerful animal. Laterinus is a relatively recently described genus of Critosaurin known from the Cerro del Pueblo Formation in Mexico, increasing the number of Mexican non-avian dinosaurs. It lived about 72 million years ago, in the Campanian age of the late Cretaceous. Having a large, arched nasal bone above the snout and enlarged nasal openings, it is clearly a relative of Critosaurus and Gryposaurus. It was probably most closely related to Gryposaurus due to the similarity of the widened nasal structure to that of Gryposaurus, more so than other members of the clade. It is one of the most southern Saurolophines known and increases the prevalence of Critosaurines in the southern part of Laramidia during the Campanian. It did not live in a particularly diverse formation, living alongside the Hadrosaurs Critosaurus and the Ceratopsian Coahuilaceratops. The fossilized remains suggest that Nippanosaurus was a relatively small hadrosaurid, possibly reaching about 4 to 5 meters in length. The specimen found is thought to be a juvenile, so adult sizes might have been larger. There has been considerable debate about whether Nippanosaurus is a valid genus or if it should be classified under a different genus of hadrosaurids. Some paleontologists have suggested it might be a juvenile of another hadrosaur species. However, distinctive features in the bones have led many to retain its status as a separate genus. The discovery of Nippanosaurus in what is now northern Japan and Sakhalin provides evidence for the distribution of hadrosaurids in Asia. It also offers insights into how dinosaurs might have migrated between Asia and North America, as similar species have been found on both continents. Bell and Brink suggested that Kazaklambia is morphologically distinct from other Eurasian taxa and known juvenile Lambeosaurines at a similar ontogenetic stage in having a prefrontal process of the postorbital with a thickened dome lateral to the frontal dome, doming of the nasal above and in front of the orbit, and a frontal length-width ratio of less than 1. It is known from a nearly complete skeleton of a juvenile, which only misses part of the snout, jaws, and end of the tail. Its nose was more domed than other Lambeosaurines and its snout was fairly narrow, indicating a difference either in auditory sounds from other Lambeosaurines or in feeding habits. It was probably a fairly early derived Lambeosaurine. Cintosaurus was initially reconstructed with a unicorn-like crest on its skull, a unique feature not seen in related species. However, in 1990, researchers Weishampel and Horner questioned the validity of this crest, suggesting it might be a distorted nasal bone and proposing that Cintosaurus might be synonymous with the crestless hadrosaur Taenius. Later, Bufftot and colleagues reaffirmed the crest's authenticity after finding a second specimen with a similar structure. In 2013, Prieto Marquez and Wagner reinterpreted the crest as part of a larger structure starting from the snout, rather than a unicorn-like projection. They also proposed a new hypothesis regarding the air passages within the crest, suggesting a complex airflow system different from previous assumptions. Their study highlighted Cintosaurus's unique anatomy, confirming it as a distinct genus with several distinctive skeletal traits beyond its crest. Caranosaurus is closely related to the well-known Parasaurolophus, and, like these dinosaurs, Caranosaurus is believed to have had a large, hollow crest, although no complete crest has been found in fossils. This crest might have been used for vocalization, display, or species recognition. It was a large hadrosaur, with estimates suggesting it could grow up to 10 to 13 meters in length. This makes it one of the largest known hadrosaurids, comparable in size to other massive dinosaurs like Edmontosaurus and Shantungosaurus. It lived during the late Cretaceous period, right before the mass extinction event. It was among the last of the non-avian dinosaurs. The known fossils are incomplete, primarily consisting of skull fragments and parts of the skeleton. This has made it challenging to fully reconstruct its appearance and behavior, but enough has been found to establish it as a distinct genus. Based on comparisons with other hadrosaurids, Tyrannosaurus likely lived in herds. These social groups would have provided protection from predators and may have been important for migration, mating, and raising young. The discovery of Tyrannosaurus has provided valuable insights into the evolution and diversity of hadrosaurids in Asia. Its close relationship with North American species like Parasaurolophus suggests there were land connections between these continents during the late Cretaceous. Parasaurolophus was large-sized hadrosaur, growing up to around 10 meters long, and is known from western North America during the late Cretaceous. Its crest was intermediate in size and shape between the other two known species. The larger Parasaurolophus tubicin had a longer and slightly straighter crest, while the smaller Parasaurolophus certicristus had a shorter, more strongly curved one. Juveniles developed these crests as they matured, starting off with much smaller bumps on their snouts that gradually grew backwards and upwards. Some hadrosaur crests were purely for visual display, but in the Lambeosaurine lineage that Parasaurolophus belonged to, they also incorporated complex looping nasal passages that were probably used as resonating chambers, allowing each species to make a unique-sounding loud bellowing call to communicate with each other. There are also rumors of a currently undescribed specimen of Parasaurolophus that has preserved soft tissue around its crest, possibly a keratinous covering or skin flaps that made it appear even larger and more flamboyant in life than the underlying bone. Olorotitan is notable for being based on the most complete Lambeosaurine skeleton found outside North America. This large hadrosaurid could reach up to 8 meters in length and 3.5 meters in height, with an estimated weight of 3 tons. It is distinguished by a unique, hatchet-like hollow crest on its skull, unlike the crests of its North American relatives. It had an elongated neck with 18 vertebrae, surpassing the usual 15 in other hadrosaurids, and its sacrum had 15 or 16 vertebrae, more than most others in its family. The rigidity observed in part of its tail is likely a natural feature rather than a pathological condition. As a hadrosaurid, Olorotitan was a bipedal quadrupedal herbivore with a sophisticated chewing mechanism, and its crest likely played a role in visual and auditory identification. The presence of diverse and common Lambeosaurines in Asia during the late Maastrichtian contrasts with their near absence in North America at that time, hinting at possible climatic or ecological differences between the continents. The generic name Olorotitan means Titanic swan, because its neck is longer when compared with other hadrosaurs, while the specific descriptor Arharensis refers to Arhara County where the fossil was found. Amyrosaurus was found in the Atuchin Formation, a part of the Tsigaian group in eastern Russia and northern China. It lived in the Maastrichtian age of the late Cretaceous, near a floodplain and river environment. It is known from a substantial number of remains from a fairly expansive bone bed, which had many juveniles of Amyrosaurus and then other hadrosaurs such as Kerberosaurus. Theropod teeth are also present there, which were probably predators of the Amyrosaurus and the like. Though the original specimen was just a portion of the lower jaw, other skeletons, and plenty of them were found in the bone bed. In fact, Amyrosaurus is one of the most abundant and completely known Russian dinosaurs. Though the crest it probably had, given its derived position in the Lambeosaurines, is not preserved, it may have served both visual display and auditory communication roles. Lambeosaurus is famous for its large, hollow, hatchet-shaped crest on its head, which contained elongated nasal passages. The shape and size of the crest varied between species and even between individuals of the same species. This crest likely played roles in communication, species recognition, and possibly even thermoregulation. The crests exhibit sexual dimorphism. Males generally had larger and more elaborate crests, which might have been used to attract mates or assert dominance within a group. The hollow crest is believed to have functioned as a resonating chamber, allowing the dinosaur to produce loud, low-frequency sounds. These sounds could have been used for communication within herds or to warn others of potential danger. It likely walked on all fours while foraging but could rear up on its hind legs when needed, such as to reach higher vegetation or to run quickly. The complex nasal passages within the crest might have contributed to an advanced respiratory system, potentially allowing Lambeosaurus to regulate its body temperature or even filter the air it breathed. Corythosaurus is known from many complete specimens, including the nearly complete holotype found by Brown in 1911. The holotype skeleton is only missing the last section of the tail and part of the front legs, but was preserved with impressions of polygonal scales. It is known from many skulls with tall crests that resemble those of the cassowary and a Corinthian helmet. The most likely function of the crest is thought to be vocalization. As in a trombone, sound waves would travel through many chambers in the crest and then get amplified when Corythosaurus exhaled. One specimen has even been preserved with its last meal in its chest cavity. Inside the cavity were remains of conifer needles, seeds, twigs and fruits, suggesting that Corythosaurus probably fed on all of these. Large herbivores like the hadrosaurs living in North America during the late Cretaceous had remarkably small geographic ranges despite their large body size and high mobility. This restricted distribution strongly contrasts with modern mammalian faunas whose large herbivores ranges typically span much of a continent. Hypacrosaurus had notable neural spines on its back, giving it a distinctive back shape. In addition, it had a distinctive, rounded crest on its head. It also doesn't have distinct S-shaped airway passages in the crest, indicating that it may have made very distinctly different sounds than other Lambeosaurines. In addition, it was probably endothermic, as determined by examining oxygen isotope levels in the bones that are similar to those of warm-blooded animals. It would have been about 9 meters long and 4 tons in weight, and would have been facultatively bipedal and quadrupedal like other hadrosaurs. The animals would have grown as fast as modern ratites based on bone histology, reaching sexual maturity at ages of 2 to 3 years old, and full size between 10 and 12 years of age. This would allow for Hypacrosaurus to reach sizes that allowed for better defense against predators faster. Magnapolia is noted for its great size and the tall profile of its tail, which had elongated chevrons and vertebral spines like those of Hypacrosaurus. Its size was estimated by its original describer as between 15 meters and 16 meters long, with a body mass of up to 8 tons. The redescription of 2012 established 2 autapomorphies, unique derived traits: the presence of chevrons at the tail base that were 4 times as long as the vertebral centra, and the possession at the tail base vertebrae of front joint processes, presagopophyses, the inner bases of which formed a bowl-shaped depression that extended upwards into a deep trough on the front surface of the spine. On the vertebral column, from at least the middle of the back to over the middle of the tail, a tall crest of almost continuous height was present, formed by spines that were about 4 times as high as the vertebral centra. Mincaria lived in Morocco at the very end of the Cretaceous. Only known from a partial skull, its full appearance and body size is unknown, but it probably measured around 3.5 meters long, slightly larger than its previously discovered relative, but still very small for a hadrosaur. It might represent a case of insular dwarfism, since at the time Morocco may have been an island isolated from the rest of northwest Africa. Along with its close relative Agenabia, and at least one other currently unnamed larger hadrosaur species, Mincaria seems to be part of a rapid diversification of hadrosaurs following their arrival in Morocco, adapting into new ecological niches in their new habitat where the only other herbivorous dinosaur competition was titanosaurian sauropods, and the only large predators were abelisaurs. Platylophus was a Lambeosaur, so another crested hadrosaur, from Mexico. The most complete Lambeosaur known from Mexico, the skull and large portions of the skeleton are known, including the tail. At about 8 meters long, it had a tall skull and thick tail, and the usual hooved front feet of hadrosaurs. Its crest was long, low, and angled backwards, much like the glyph for word in Aztec writings, hence its name. Given the unique shape, it probably made a unique sound, different from other hadrosaurs. Interestingly, it actually seems to have been closely related to Parasaurolophus and its relatives, making it another member of the Parasaurolophinae group. As a hadrosaur, it would have been a social animal, with behaviors such as communal nature and communication.